Daf Yomi Tractate Menachot, page 54. And the bottom of 53, B, is Tanu Rabbanan Ein Machmitzin. The sages taught in a Braita one may not leaven the meal offerings that come as leavened bread. And now 54a on top. But Tapuchim. Yishuman Rechanina ben Gamliel Amru Machmitzin Kal Masnila. Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion. One may not leaven the meal offerings that come as leavened bread with apple juice, as the dough will not leaven properly. It was said in the name of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel that one may leaven these meal offerings with apple juice, as this is considered proper leavening. The Gemara notes that Rav Kahana would teach this halacha in the name of Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion, not in the name of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. Kimanaz la ditanan tapuach sher yisko nasno betoch ha'isa b'chimtza arezo asua. The Gemara analyzes this dispute in accordance with whose opinion is that which we learned in a Mishnah in Trumot 10:2. In the case of an apple of Truma that one mashed and placed in non-sacred dough, and the juice, how do you mash an apple? Maybe shredded it up, who knows? Be chopped up into small pieces. One mashed and placed into non-sacred dough, and the juice of the apple leaven the dough. This dough is prohibited to be consumed by anyone who may not partake of truma. Kiman. The Gemara reiterates the question in accordance with whose opinion is the Mishnah. Leima Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel hi v'lo Rabbanan afilu tim Rabbanan nid chametz gamur lo have nuksha miha have. Shall we say that it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, who maintains that the juice of apples causes the dough to leaven properly, and not in accordance with the ruling of the rabbis? The majority opinion that disputes this ruling, the Gemara refutes this suggestion. You may even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. Granted, the rabbis hold that dough leavened by the juice of apples does not become full-fledged leavened bread, but in any event, it becomes hardened. Leavened, consequently, dough leavened by the juice of truma apples is prohibited to non-priests. Amar Rabbi Ila, lecha hakasha lekamitza yoter minchat choite. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi Omar minchas choite magbela maim kshero. On the previous Amud, the Gemara cited the opinion of Rabbah and Rav Yosef that measuring the flour in the leavening dough must be performed before water is added. The Gemara discusses this matter further. Rabbi Ila says, of all the meal offerings, you do not have a meal offering whose removal of the handful is more difficult than that of the meal offering of a sinner. This particular meal offering is dry, as no oil is added to it. Therefore, it is very difficult to remove precisely a handful, as when the priest takes a handful with his thumb and a little finger, a large amount of flour is apt to fall out. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi says the removal of the handful in the case of the meal offering of a sinner is no more difficult than its removal in other meal offerings. The reason is that, although the Torah prohibited the addition of oil to the meal offering of a sinner, nevertheless, the priest may need it in water, and it is fit to be offered. Lema b'hakamiflegi. Timaus kamos shehen me sharinon, numaus v'kamos shehayu mi sharinon. The Gemara analyzes this dispute. Let us say that these Amoraim disagree about this. As one sage, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, holds that one measures meal offerings as they are in their current state after they have been mixed into a dough. Therefore, it is permitted to perform the removal of the handful after water has been added, at which point it is not particularly difficult, a particularly difficult rite to perform. And one sage, Rabbi Elah, holds that one measures meal offerings as they were before they were mixed with water. When they were still flour. Therefore, if one were to add water before measuring, he might add too much, which would cause the dough to be too soft, and the measure of the offering too large, or conversely, if he were to add too little water to the dough, it would be stiff and too small in volume. Either way, the handful will not contain the correct amount of flour, and therefore, no water may be added. Lo, Chuliama kemos shehein misharinon ubehakam yifligi demaasav mai chalevo chayo mishemin demaasav chalevo b'kol davar. The Gemara responds, no, as everyone agrees that one measures meal offerings as they currently are, and it is with regard to this that they disagree. As one sage, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, holds, what is the meaning of dry? Written in the verse discussing a meal offering, and every meal offering mixed with oil or dry. Leviticus 7:10, it means dry of oil, but one may add water. And one sage, Rabbi Elah, holds that the meal offering of a sinner must be dry of all substances, and it may not even contain water. Tanan Hasam Basar Ha'egel Shenitpach Basar Zakena Shenitpach Shitma'ech Mishtarinan Chamois Shehein. The question concerning whether a meal offering is to be measured in its current mixed state or as it was before it was mixed relates to a fundamental issue that also arises in other areas of halacha. We learned in a Mishnah there in Oketsin 2:8, meat of a calf that swelled due to cooking, as the volume of calf flesh increases when it is cooked in water, or meat of an old animal that shrank due to cooking, which is what happens to meat at this time, are to be measured as they are in order to determine if they are the volume of an egg bulk, in which case they can contract ritual impurity and transfer impurity of food to other items. Rav Rochani Rechia Yochel Mishtarinon Mishtarin Kmois Shehein Shmuel Rabbi Shimon Bar Rabbi V'Reish Lakish Amri Mishtarin Kemos Shehein. The sages disagree as to the meaning of measured as they are. Rav, Rechia, and Rabbi Yochanan all say that it means the items are to be measured as they are currently, after having been cooked. Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon Bar Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Shmuel, Rabbi, and Reish Lakish all say it means they are to be measured according to their volume as they are, before having been cooked. In other words, even if the meat of a calf is the volume of an egg yolk after it was cooked, if it was less than this before cooking, it cannot contract ritual impurity. Conversely, even if the meat of an old animal was less than an egg bulk after cooking, if it was an egg bulk before it was cooked, it can contract ritual impurity. Bo Kishiu, Tavach Yomar Al Kishiu, Tohoil. Dishiavad, Riton Kanaba. The Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon bar Yehuda Nasi, and Reish Lakish from a Braita with regard to the meat of a calf. So, a moment here. Okay, continue. The Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon bar Yehuda Nasi, Reish Lakish from a Braita with regard to meat of a calf that came into contact with a source of ritual impurity, but that was not of a volume equivalent to the minimum measure for contracting impurity, meaning egg bulk, if it was then cooked, and as a result it swelled until it stood at the requisite measure for ritual impurity. This meat is pure with regard to the past, but it can become impure and render other items impure from here on. In other words, the previous contact with a source of impurity did not render the meat impure, as it was of insufficient volume at the time. This indicates that the status of an item with regard to ritual impurity depends on its volume at the current moment. The Gemara answers, it is possible that by Torah law, this meat is in fact not susceptible to ritual impurity, even from here on, as the halacha defines it by its volume prior to cooking. Nevertheless, the Braita teaches that is impure by rabbinic law. The Gemara asks, if so, say the latter clause of the Braita, and similarly the same principle applies to an offering that was sacrificed with the intent to consume it after its designated time, pigul, and similarly with regard to food left over from an offering after the time allotted for its consumption. No doubt. The Gemara analyzes this statement. Granted, if you say that the Braita is discussing halachot that apply by Torah law, this is why the cases of pigul and notar are included in the Braita, as they also apply by Torah law. But if you say that the halachot in the Braita applied by rabbinic law, are there pigul and notar by rabbinic law? Ema v'chein b'tumat pigul v'chein b'tumat notar. The Gemara answers say that the Braita is not referring to the prohibitions of pigul and notar, rather it means the following. And similarly, the same principle applies with regard to ritual impurity imparted by pigul, and similarly with regard to ritual impurity imparted by notar. There is a rabbinic decree that meat which is pigul or notar imparts impurity to one's hands, even if the meat itself was not impure. The Braita teaches that if the meat is at least the volume of an egg after it was cooked, it renders the hands impure in this manner. The Gemara explains that this statement is necessary, as it might enter your mind to say, since the concepts of impurity imparted by pigul and impurity imparted by notar applied by rabbinic law, the sages did not institute a stringency to such an extent, making items that were less than the requisite volume until they were cooked contract and impart forms of impurity that apply by rabbinic law. Therefore, the Braita teaches us that this halacha does apply to those forms of ritual impurity. Tashima. Basal zikena shahoyo bo kishiu bitzomak pachot mikishiu tamel shiaval v'taho mikan ulihaba. The Gemara continues to analyze this dispute, coming here a Braita with regard to meat from an old animal that initially was of a volume equivalent to the requisite measure for contracting ritual impurity and became impure, after which it was cooked. As a result, shrank until it was less than the requisite measure for contracting impurity. It is considered impure with regard to items that touched it in the past when it was large enough, and it is pure with regard to items that it may touch from here on. This Braita indicates that the current state of the item is decisive. Amarabo, kol heichod me'ikoro halibei v'hashto lesbei had lesbei v'chol heichod de me'ikoro lo havabei v'hashto havabei midava. Rabbah said, in explanation of the dispute between the Amoraim elsewhere, meaning with regard to any item that was initially of a volume equivalent to the requisite measure, but now it is not of such a volume. The halacha is determined according to the item's current volume, and it is not the requisite volume. Conversely, anywhere, meaning with regard to any item that initially was not of the requisite measure, but now is of sufficient volume, the item contracts impurity by rabbinic law. Okay, we'll stop here. Continue with next Amud.